Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old, an anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, it's Thursday, September the 25th, 2025. We'll probably put this out tomorrow. Looking at the headlines on CNN, the White House apparently is threatening mass firings, escalating the standoff with the Democrats. New York Times leads with a story about a diminished Social Security workforce, all real things. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's found something else to distract us with, apparently what he calls a triple sabotage at the United Nations. And it's really hard to tell, in my view at least, or from my point of view, what the state of democracy and freedom is in America. We did a show earlier this week with my old friend John Rausch from the Brookings Institute. He believes we're halfway to Hungary, we being America, and I'm not convinced of that, or maybe halfway to America is lost in the mid-Atlantic. Another old friend of mine is Micah Sifry. He's an old-time organizer, technologist, the guy who epitomizes, I think, the progressive community of New York City. He's the author of a wonderful Substack called The Connector. And I thought I'd invite him on to get his take, his reality check on America in late September 2025. So Micah, welcome to the show. I'm not sure if you've actually been on the show. You and I have done many things over the years, so it's wonderful to talk to you again. Are we, to borrow some language from John Rausch, I'm sure you're familiar with his work, is America halfway to Hungary? And if it is, what exactly does that mean?
Well, I think he's probably right. And what he means is the Hungary model being one where an autocrat takes authoritarian power by democratic means. He basically dismantles the guardrails, dismantles the checks and balances, the separation of powers. He undermines media independence. He forces independent civil society institutions to bend the knee and cracks down on dissent. And then you end up living in a de facto one-party regime where the most important sort of ruling principle is, are you loyal to the despot? And if you are, then he'll make deals with you as long as you go along with whatever he wants. This also comes with the sort of coloration of white Christian backlash, of designating certain people and certain ideas as things that have to be stamped out because they're corrupting. That would be things like transgender identity or support for diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you agree to, stop promoting those things or actively promote the opposite, then you'll win favor. And we are about halfway there, though I don't think we're on a nonstop one-way train there. I think we're in a really challenging time, but at the same time that Trump is doing all of these things, he isn't popular. I would be much more worried if Trump's approval rating was 50% or 60%, but it's hovering barely at 40%. And the same goes for a lot of his minions. The things they're doing are largely unpopular. Even the stuff he's doing on the border. I mean, he that seems to be the one issue where there's maybe 50% support, but then when you ask people about the details, should families be separated? Should people who have been living in the United States for a long time and paying their taxes and they're law-abiding, hard-working members of the community, should those people be swept up by ICE? Lots of people say no. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that we are going to become a one-party authoritarian system like Hungary, where, yeah, they'll still have elections, but they're not competitive because the whole thing is rigged. But it's a very dangerous moment. And there's, really important questions about how the majority, if he's at 40%, that means there's 50 to 60% of the public that, didn't vote for him and don't support what he's doing, but they are not politically powerful, to push back successfully. And so there's a lot of damage being done, every day.
You wrote an interesting op-ed in the New York Times in April of this year. It was entitled "A Different Kind of Anti-Trump Resistance is Brewing." I wonder if it is, in some ways at least.
I didn't title it that way, but yeah.
Yeah, and we all know editors, Micah, that they have their own language. That's their only value. So often talking to authors, they
have to sell clicks, so fine.
But you, in the piece, you talked about Schumer and his decision to keep the Trump presidency or the government open. Right. Given that history is repeating itself now, when it comes to resistance, what would be your advice to Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Party? Should they shut government down? What were you saying back in April, and what have we learned since April? It's been quite a 5 or 6 months.
Yeah, they have leverage and they should use it. They shouldn't be afraid to use it. If there's a shutdown, the party in power gets blamed. And Trump is a deal maker. We have again and again seen that when people push back with sufficient force, he backs down. Do you remember Liberation Day? He imposed all of these radical tariffs. The reasoning behind the numbers seemed to just be pulled out of thin air, and the stock market crashed. And within a day or two, he had completely reversed himself. Again and again on smaller things, ICE is doing these raids, but people in big agriculture and in the hotel industry have talked to Trump. And so they've paused them in terms of attacking those industries because he's a deal maker. And so in this case, Schumer and the Senate Democrats, their votes are needed in order to keep financing the government. That gives them leverage, and they should absolutely use it. I think they've identified a fairly clear issue that they're sort of taking this stand on, that the big ugly bill, which gave more tax cuts to billionaires, did not include the continuation of tax credits for people who pay for Obamacare. And so something like 20 or 30 million people are about to see their healthcare premiums double. And that's a real issue. And Democrats should do other things with their leverage. They should try and insist that Trump stop with these rescissions, where the Congress has appropriated money and he refuses to spend it. He has no constitutional authority to do that. They have to get tough. And I think the public will back them if they show spine. The problem has been that they waffle and they're afraid. And that is why so many Democratic voters are angry at their own so-called leaders, because they're not seeing them demonstrate any real leadership. This is a case where we need something more than just a strongly worded letter from Chuck Schumer to the president.
Yeah, you're in New York, Micah, so you're in the middle of debates about a new kind of Democratic Party. I'm guessing that you're sympathetic to Mamdani. We did a show earlier this week on the 107-day debacle of Kamala Harris. What's your take on the current rottenness of the Democratic Party? Is Mamdani the answer? Is he a problem in himself? Is he a false? Is there something real on the horizon, or is it just more confusion and upheaval?
Okay, so that you've asked a lot of questions there. First of all, I have to respect any Democratic politician who can create a surge in the youth vote. In that primary where he beat a very seasoned former governor in Mario Cuomo soundly, the astonishing thing, and the reason why the polls didn't predict this, is that people under the age of 40 turned out in huge numbers. And it simply never happens. I mean, I think the last time I saw a surge in young people voting for a unusual candidate was when Jesse Ventura ran between the Democratic and the Republican nominees for governor of Minnesota and had a huge last-minute turnout of young voters. He was helped by the fact that in Minnesota you have same-day voter registration, so people could, at the last minute, as their enthusiasm was growing, they could come out and vote, even register at the polling place. So I think Mamdani represents a generational shift that's underway inside the Democratic Party that we've needed for a long time. The Joe Biden era, the Jim Clyburn era, the Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi. I mean, these people have been in power for too long, and they have not kept up with the times, nor have they figured out how to reach, half the country that's, under the age of 40. So I don't want to only look at Mamdani in ideological terms. There are people who are like, oh my God, he's a socialist. Well, so is Fiorello LaGuardia, who was one of New York City's great mayors. So in New York City, the way that Mamdani fits is we have a very, very robust tradition of public works in New York. The public schools, the public libraries, public transit, even the waterworks, which goes back even into the mid 1800s. That was all public spending that created the reservoir system that gives New Yorkers such good water. And so he is very much in the mainstream of New York City politics, and he will win, I think, a pretty convincing victory in November. I don't also think he is going to govern like an ideological socialist. I mean, in the same way that Bernie Sanders, when he was mayor of Burlington, which was the stepping stone to him then eventually, getting elected to Congress and then the Senate, he had to make sure that the snow was plowed and the streets were cleaned and the buses worked and all of those things. And mayors everywhere have to be are really more accountable because of the directness of their relationship to their constituents.
How dissatisfied are you as a man, a progressive, with the Democratic Party? Back in January, you wrote a piece for the American Prospect called "Opening the DNC's Black Box." I know you do some consulting work for the Center for Ballot Freedom, which is about perhaps reinventing the American two-party system. Have you personally, Micah Sifry, have you given up with the Dems?
Well, as a pragmatic voter where I live, I'm a registered Democrat because the main game for electing people from where I live is inside the Democratic primary. And I want to have a voice in that. And it's frustrating because we have a hidebound state Democratic Party in New York, which has long been run by pay-to-play politicians And so there's a battle inside that party that is ongoing. For many years, when Andrew Cuomo was the governor, he had a very cozy relationship with state Republicans. And one of the side effects of Donald Trump getting elected in 2016 is a lot of grassroots Democrats in New York looked around and said, why are Democrats so cozy with the Republicans in the state legislature? And a whole bunch of them were actually voted out in the primaries. So there's a lot of potential for renewal and change inside the Democratic coalition here in New York. At the same time, we have the thing that the Center for Ballot Freedom is trying to do. New York is one of the few states that never lost the ability for minor parties to fuse, to have their own separate line on the ballot, but cross-endorse candidates of the major parties when they thought those candidates were close enough to their values and could be, in effect, drawn towards the smaller parties' program if enough people vote on that party line. So in New York, we have the Working Families Party. In 2020, I think Joe Biden got 400,000 votes on the Working Families Party line, which contributed to his victory in New York. And every other politician in New York knows exactly how many votes they got for their election on the Working Families Party line. Same thing is true for the Republicans with the Conservative Party here in New York, which gives conservatives some leverage that they wouldn't have in other places. So we have a more vibrant, open system here. I think it's an ongoing battle to figure out how we can actually get to a system that's more representative. I think the national Democrats have a very big challenge because they're, unlike the Republican Party, where one faction, the MAGA faction, it has become big enough and strong enough to take over the entire party. And then when you win power in our two-party system, they now have tremendous power. There may be 20% of the voters in America would say they identify as MAGA. That's off of a recent YouGov poll. But inside the Republican Party system, that's 60% of the Republican primary voter base. And so MAGA now is really dominant. If we were in a multi-party system, the MAGA party would get 20% of the vote and 20% of the power, not 100% of the power. The Democratic Party has a different problem, which is we don't have a dominant faction. The Democratic Party is, I would say, a coalition of different factions. And what you see again and again is that the two major factions, you might call them, the Bernie AOC side of the party and the more Hakeem Jeffries, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer side. One is more corporate, one is more anti-corporate. But they have very, very strong differences. And the only time they ever kind of put the differences behind them is when somebody wins the Democratic Party's presidential nomination and everybody tries to get behind that person. But it is a reason why I think it's a big part of why the Democratic Party right now is struggling is it has no clear message. And you can't get to a clear message when you are so divided by factions. If we had a multi-party system, the Democrats would probably break into, at least two, if not more, different parties. And those parties would each have their own identity and they would form pragmatic coalitions to win elections. The same way that lots of, multi-party systems work across Europe. We are stuck inside of what my friend Lee Drutman calls the two-party doom loop.
Lee's been on the show. Another person who's been on the show is someone you did an interesting Substack post about in your conversation. Ian Bassin of Protect Democracy, a Yale law grad, very thoughtful guy, about protecting democracy. What's your view on how Americans, not just perhaps progressives, but all Americans can indeed protect democracy in this weird, surreal Trumpian age where we are, so to speak, halfway to Hungary.
Yeah, the thing that is very much on my mind now, and particularly more since Charlie Kirk's assassination, and the the blast radius, the way that is still rippling through everybody's psyches, is how do we break this cycle of polarization that we're on in a way that strengthens the pro-democracy majority, weakens the populist authoritarian minority. And because one of the things that I've noticed is, there are certain ways of organizing and protesting and trying to have a political impact that we fall into, often quite unconsciously by habit, that have the perverse effect of not just organizing our side, but also organizing the other side. Years ago, I remember a historian of the 1960s who made this comment to me. I think his name was Donald Brown. I really ought to go back and double check. And he said, what we, meaning the anti-war movement, the peace movement in the late 60s, he said, what we didn't realize as we were organizing many of our protests is at the same time we were also organizing the police. We were organizing the other side. If you demonize your opponent, you don't necessarily convince them to defect from the position that they're holding. You strengthen their feeling like, those people are evil and I've got to stick to my guns, metaphorically. And so we have a challenge. There is a movement in the United States that goes way beyond whatever the Democratic Party is doing. We do not expect leadership from the Democratic Party in fixing this. That's one of the reasons I wrote that New York Times op-ed. These guys are not organizers. Chuck Schumer doesn't know anything about community organizing. He knows a lot about fundraising, and he knows a lot about how to win a majority in the Senate so that he can go back to being Senate Majority Leader. That's what he specializes in. I thought that all these newly fired federal workers who really have been at the tip of the spear in terms of who's been most immediately harmed. The DOJ cuts were arbitrary. Now they're talking about expanding with further mass firings. And the thing is that in the abstract, federal workers get a bad rap. A lot of people say, oh, they're bureaucrats. I hate bureaucrats. They just interfere with my ability to, start a business or whatever. But many of these federal workers are, devoted to serving every American. They take an oath to the Constitution, which they believe in very strongly. And a lot of what they do is just basic services. I need the Weather Service to be able to, give me accurate predictions on hurricanes. We need the people who make sure our roads are safe or the food we eat isn't poisonous to be able to do their jobs. And when you start whacking away at them, the New York Times headline you flashed before, the idea that people on Social Security now can't get timely resolution of their problems because they've just arbitrarily whacked away at the Social Security workforce. It's incredibly damaging, and those people who are losing their jobs, I've talked to a lot of them, and I think a lot of them are very different than the sort of women's march.
Right. I mean, Micah, let me jump in here. I was talking to a young woman who came to stay last week with us.
Mm-hmm.
Woman on the left, and she was talking about leaving America. She said she's going to wait till next year to see what happens in the midterms. Is it possible that everything will go back to normal in the midterms? Everything you're saying, and logically, a lot of what I've been reading recently suggests that you're right, that Trump isn't particularly popular, that much of what he's doing, whether it's with Social Security or undermining government, most people ultimately are not happy with that, and that things will just come back to normal next year. And rather than being halfway to Hungary next year, we'll realize that we've all been part of this Donald Trump show, and that if we vote appropriately, maybe not ideally with the Democratic Party, but it's better than nothing, things would just go back to normal.
Well, I would never say that things are going to go back to normal. I think we are in the middle of a generational shift, and a big part of why Trump won, apart from Kamala Harris inheriting a mess and not having enough time to fix it, and in general, national Democrats, definitely deciding that they could ignore the fears and resentments of working class Americans because they would just get more suburban votes. Chuck Schumer literally said, for every, vote that we lose in West Virginia's, the working class there, we'll get 2 votes in the suburbs of Philadelphia. He was totally wrong about that. So I don't think we go back to normal. I think and also the damage that's being done will not be, even if the Democrats win the House back, which I think they can do, not so clear about the Senate, Andrew, which means we'll just have gridlock. We'll have some ability to stymie Trump, but they still have the Senate probably, and they still have the Supreme Court for sure. So we're still going to go through more turmoil, but maybe some of the bleeding can be stopped. But don't say go back to normal. I think we're in for abnormal years for a while. And I also think that if the Democratic Party does not transform itself by shedding all this older baggage and embracing younger leadership and a different way of connecting with people, not just the language and messaging that they use, but even the methods that they use. The thing about Charlie Kirk, let's talk about what he built for a second, okay? He built a youth movement, and it started from his own, passion to just go on campuses and engage with people regardless of what their views were and stick up for his views. He attracted a lot of conservative money, and let's not forget, there's more money on the conservative side for these kinds of experiments than there is on the liberal side. Most liberal money goes into paying for campaign ads and polling. But he built something through lots of personal relationship building. And we have nothing on the progressive side that matches what Turning Point Action is in terms of chapter-based, around a common message, a methodology that's heavily invested on conversation and listening. Now, I don't think the type of listening that Kirk displayed on his videos and shows was true debate. I think in many cases it was, the people he was arguing with were fodder. They were it's easy to win an argument against a, naive 20-year-old who hasn't really thought through their ideas if you've been at it for a while. But at the same time, they built something. It's got chapters.
Let me just jump in here on the Kirk thing.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're describing sounds to me, and we've done a number of shows on this, as a kind of culture. You talked about the 60s. Maybe we've turned everything upside down, and Charlie Kirk represents another countercultural movement. Sure. We may not like him. I certainly don't particularly care for him. But nonetheless, as you've noted, he was a remarkably successful political organizer. You're an expert in political organization. Yeah. And it's organization from the right. And it comes back to my point of history always changes. And what was the counterculture in the late 60s now has become a new kind of counterculture. Why is that so exceptional?
Well, I think there is something about the desire among every young generation rebels against its parents and needs to find its own identity. I do think that progressives, certainly of the last decade or so, coming out of university, adopted a approach to politics that was heavily invested on centering identity and a kind of hierarchy of oppressions, which put men and white men at the very bottom of the people who mattered. And that was a gigantic mistake and absolutely created an opening, an opportunity for young men, and in particular young white men who are struggling to find their place in this world. Everybody, when they're young, is struggling to find their place in this world. But they did not see what they perceived as the dominant culture as seeing them as people who mattered. And that is always a ripe, that creates a ripe ground for backlash politics. The manosphere, the Joe Rogan, argument that I'm being censored because I can't make fun of.
So coming back to the left,
right?
What does the left do to reinvent itself?
Well, first of all,
you come up with a way of doing politics, thinking about America, thinking about the future that doesn't fall back. You just described this obsession with identity politics as a huge mistake. What else is there within the within the game plan of the left to counter Charlie Kirk's populism?
Sure. Well, I think the easiest and most obvious answer is economic populism, class. I was looking at a video on Instagram the other day of Bernie Sanders visiting Mingo County, West Virginia, a few weeks ago to talk to Trump voters. And he talks to them about the billionaires and the big corporations that are impoverishing them. And he strikes a very strong chord. And then there's a scene in the video where he's sitting at a lunch counter with a couple of these folks, and a middle-aged white woman says to him, you're nothing like what I thought you would be. You're so nice. You're so easy to talk to. She says, I went to one of your events and my entire worldview has been thrown upside down because in the Trump information bubble, socialism, communism, Bernie is this, big fire-eating dragon or something. And then you meet this guy and he's actually very down to earth and relatable. And I think there are a lot of similar politicians coming up inside, in his sort of coattails, who want to do the same thing. Mamdani being a good example, AOC being a good example. Not all of them will necessarily be right on all the progressive issues. People don't even remember this, but when Bernie Sanders was coming up in Vermont, he was very pro-gun rights. It was very late in his career, I think, that he began to talk about gun control. And why is that? Because most people in Vermont hunt, and especially the working class people. And in the northern kingdom of Vermont, which is the northeast corner, where Bernie does surprisingly well, even though that's the most Republican part of the state. So there's another way of doing this. It's not we don't have to invent something new, really. I think the Democrats also have to talk more about monopoly power and why breaking up monopolies is
I assume you're very much in the Zephyr teach out camp.
Zephyr and I are friends.
She came on the show. She was very good. Yep. I know you got to run, Micah, so a couple of other things before I let you go. You wrote a very interesting piece on your Substack connector on with the title, and you chose this title, I assume, "Blessed Are the Bridge Builders."
Yep.
question mark, and it was about groups like Braver Angels that bring people together. I was particularly intrigued with this because I've always been slightly skeptical of what the Braver Angels have got up to, although we've had a number of them on our show, and I've actually even been to a couple of their conventions. What do you make of organizations? I don't want to make this just about Braver Angels, but what do you make of these organizations like Braver Angels that are designed to bring people together, these bridge building organizations?
Well, I do think we've become a hyper-polarized country where instead of seeing our political adversaries simply as people we disagree with, we see them as enemies or even evil. The language that J.D. Vance has been using lately is very disturbing, for example. And that tendency, we have to figure out how to interrupt it and lower the temperature back to a level where we can still talk to each other, even if we strongly disagree. And I think that is Braver Angels and the whole, this civic renewal, bridge building sector. There are a bunch of organizations that kind of travel in their wake. What I was upset with them about, they did an event a few days after Kirk's assassination. And I tuned in to see, what would they say? And what frustrated me is that there's a real danger right now that it's not just that we're hyperpolarized, it's that one side has all the levers of governmental power and is absolutely using them at a speed and scale that we've never seen to dismantle and destroy their opponents, as Stephen Miller would put it. And that you cannot say that the left and it's whatever you want to complain about, the identity politics, the insistence that people use appropriate pronouns for the person they're addressing, that is at the same level of power to affect society as what Trump and Miller and Vance are all doing now. And that this is a moment where people in the bridge building world, I think, have to ask themselves, where do I stand on this? And they're avoiding it. And they're avoiding it because I think their methodology is, if we emphasize it, we're going to lose our Republican participants. And I hear that. I agree that we have to search for ways to weaken the MAGA coalition. We need people to defect from that coalition. The idea that somehow progressives will get strong enough to defeat MAGA is a mistake, because as progressives get more, if we get more and more shrill, we will just help MAGA get stronger at the same time. And so there's something about how do you diffuse or change what people are being polarized over, from red versus blue to something else, democracy versus authoritarian.
Yeah, and I agree on that asymmetry. It's rather like people who talk about just the way to solve the problem in Israel is for Israeli Jews and Palestinians to talk to one another. It's a similar sort of asymmetry there, or more exaggerated, of course, there than it is here. So in a sense, maybe rather than being halfway to Budapest or halfway to Hungary, we're halfway to Jerusalem or Tel Aviv.
Well, I actually think what Israel is doing right now is what happens when you get a right-wing government, already the most right-wing government even before October 7th, and then your enemy throws a pogrom at you, and the country goes mad, and they are now led, and you have a corrupt, leader who needs the war to keep going so he can avoid his day in court, and losing his governing coalition. So it's not exactly analogous, but 70% of Israelis now want the war to be over.
Right. So, but I don't want turn this into an Arab-Israeli, but maybe we'll do another show on that. I know you've got some strong views. But coming back to the Braver Angels, so I mean, there are a lot of people in these organizations. I've been to a couple of their national conventions. A lot of people show up. The suburbanites from Pennsylvania, those people that Chuck Schumer thought he could win back to the Democratic Party that he didn't. What would you advise the guys at Braver Angels to do? How do you use an organization designed to build bridges to actually build bridges rather than perhaps simply empower MAGA?
Well, what I've been struck by, and in fact, after I wrote that piece, I got some really interesting feedback from people who are thinking about bridge building in the service of fighting authoritarian populists. Okay. It's sort of like a both and rather than an either or. And these are people who are paying a lot of attention to behavioral psychology and the psychology of how we trigger each other or find a way to a mutual understanding. And the radical idea here is that you have to be expressively open to listening and to even loving the people you disagree with. And that take the focus off of Trump. This is the thing. It's very, very hard to do this because every day he does another outrageous thing and you and I, our hair is on fire. It's hard to avoid.
Right. Today it's the United Nations. Tomorrow it'll be something else.
Something else, all in service of preventing us from knowing how much he's in the Epstein files. But the take oxygen away from Trump and pour it towards empathetic engagement with people, I would say the people right now who are having buyer's remorse. Do not demonize them. Do not make fun of them for that stupid decision you made to vote for Trump.
And don't accuse them of being intrinsic, dyed-in-the-wool racists or sexists or whatever.
What? I have a vivid memory of George Wallace apologizing to Jesse Jackson when he was running for president, and Wallace had been an avowed racist, though late in life he had a change of view, and Jackson accepting his apology. The churches grow when you welcome the sinners. One of the very, very problematic aspects of a certain part of left culture is this insistence on purity, on if you're not saying things the right way or haven't read the right books or wearing the right whatever, you're not good enough to join my club. Whereas the evangelical movement grows because it's constantly welcoming people in, even if they're not perfect. First, we just want to be friends with you, and we'll trust that you'll come to share our beliefs later, is their approach.
Yeah, it's an interesting, a couple of more things, Micah, then I'm going to let you go. You and I have a long history of disagreement on tech. We've been involved in debates for 20, 25 years on the political implications of the internet, of Web 2, of social media. We haven't had a debate for a while. Is it possible to argue that Trumpism, MAGA, this authoritarian populism, is a direct consequence of a democratized internet, or is it more sophisticated than that?
I was thinking, Andrew, I'm glad you asked that question because as I was thinking about talking with you today, I said to myself that I absolutely was hoping I would have a chance to apologize to you because I think you were more right than me with your book, The Cult of the Amateur, and that the people who thought, perhaps naively or with good intention, that if we opened up the system, here comes everyone, as Clay Shirky put it, that this would sort of naturally lead to healthier, better, smarter outcomes, the wisdom of the crowds, as the saying went. that we did not pay enough attention to what the loss of standards and gatekeepers and quality controls, whatever you want to call them, what that would also do. So I don't believe you can put that genie back into the bottle. I do think that it's very disappointing to see how much both parties have enabled the tech industry to behave without any responsibility for how its products harm people. It's a very powerful thing, social media, and it does. I do want to live in a world where everybody can publish freely, but I do think that platforms have responsibilities. And the problem is, it's very expensive to actually install and maintain those guardrails. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg is thrilled that he can fire all his fact checkers, but we all suffer as a result. When nuclear energy was invented, we all saw very quickly how dangerous it could be, and that's always been under very heavy regulation, right? But the social energy that the internet has freed up, we have very few guardrails for protecting us from the negative effects of crowds going on rampages. And yes, I do think it's part of the rise of the strongman. Jeremy Hymans and Henry Timms wrote New Power, and they invented this term, meaning a whole range of people from Hungary to the Philippines to the United States and even Brazil, etc., where you've seen these kind of very successful demagogues who use the slipperiness of social media to their advantage. The cost, it costs a lot less to create bullshit than it does to debunk it.
It's a nice way of putting it.
And it's very disorienting. And the scariest thing is the rise of nihilism. We've now seen a number of depraved individuals who, as best as I can tell, have no particular ideology at all other than burn it all down. The guy who shot at Trump also had Biden on his calendar. I don't think he had an ideology.
Yeah, it's a return to the sort of Russian nihilism of the late 19th century, this disdain for doing anything except violence, a lack of respect for human life.
Even a competition for notoriety, which is extremely dangerous. And if only we as a society could, I think everybody across the political spectrum would agree, this is a problem. And, let's get the FBI focused on what we do to, make it harder for this stuff to circulate. But instead, it seems like the people in power want to weaponize these tragedies into their campaign against the what they see as the liberal left that has to be dismantled and destroyed.
So finally, Micah, your career, if there's one way of summarizing, I think you've always been committed to political organization. You founded Personal Democracy Media, where you and I met. I've spoken at many of your conferences. You're also the co-founder with another old friend, Andrew Risset, of Civic Hall in New York City. It seems as if we're in an age, maybe again a transformatory kind of age, where traditional engagement politics is changing. There was a lot of news earlier this year about the No Kings demonstration, but like a lot of the Trump stuff, there's a lot of news and then it disappears. What's your advice to people who don't like what's happening in America? Should they go on demonstration? Should they reorganize events like No King? Should they rejoin their Democratic Party? Should they stay at home and put earphones on their ears and just enjoy life and their family? What should we be doing in this age?
I'm glad you're asking me that. It's my rabbi at my synagogue is actually gave me a similar question, and I'm going to be giving a short talk on this subject on Yom Kippur next week. So my answer is, first of all, yes, a lot of people are in pain and being harmed right now for nothing more than their, immigrant status, or maybe they're trans, or maybe, they work somewhere where things like diversity and equity and inclusion are values that they're trying to uphold. And this is very un-American, what's happening to them, and we shouldn't, close our eyes and do nothing. That is the way that leads to worse. First they came for the, et cetera, the quote. But it is also overwhelming to try and keep up with it all and take it all in and figure out, what should I do? Do not attempt to do that. It will exhaust you and burn you out. My advice is try to pick one thing that you can do that hopefully is local and is with other people. Don't try and do anything by yourself. Isolation is just bad in general. And loneliness is one of the underlying problems that is driving all kinds of dysfunction in America. Action will help relieve your anxiety. All these little actions that we can take. The Jimmy Kimmel example is a nice one for the last week. There was a huge backlash to him being suspended, and that backlash organized everywhere, and hundreds of thousands of people canceled their subscriptions to Disney, et cetera, et cetera. It's still going on. Those little you may think, well, I'm just going to cancel. What is that going to do? But it absolutely shifted the stock price and led to Disney backing down. And this is again a reminder: what Trump is doing is not popular. It is a majority of the country didn't. 77 million people voted for him. 75 million people did not, and then there were another 50, 60 million who didn't vote at all. And a lot of those people are also watching and saying, this is not what I want either. That's why his approval ratings are negative. So small actions can lead up to big effects. The No Kings people are rallying again on October 18th. There are thousands of events. It's on track to be bigger than it was in June, which means potentially, 6 to 10 million people across the country. That's a huge number, Andrew. When people do this, and when they get out and they visibly protest, they are also sending a message to each other that no, the bully is not winning. The best way to fight a bully is don't try and do it by yourself. You have to get your friends together, and then you push back. And what we know about Trump is he's fundamentally a bit of a weakling. And that he does often back down. He's very transactional. He's desperate to be loved. So there are many, many ways that we can push back.
Well, wise words from Micah Sifry, the publisher of an excellent Substack, The Connector. Micah, we'll have to get you back on the show. The Donald Trump show, the latest version of it, is in its first year. We've unfortunately got 3 more years, but no doubt there'll be all sorts of interesting episodes. So thank you so much. Keep well, keep fighting. I think I've got a title for this one, Micah. What Trump is doing is not popular. I think that's a good summary of what you're saying.
Very nice, Andrew. Thank you. Great to see you. You be well too.